What's the significance of China promised zero tariffs for Africa? China has promised zero tariffs for Africa, i.e. removed import duties on goods from many African countries is significant. I break down the key implications and why it matters for Africa, China, and global trade. What China's zero tariff promise is. As of December 2024, China implemented a policy granting zero tariffs on all taxable products imported from least developed countries, LDCs, with diplomatic ties to China. This initially covered 33 African LDCs. In June 2025, China expanded the policy. Now 53 African countries, i.e. all African countries with diplomatic relations with China, are eligible with one exception, Eswatini, because it recognizes Taiwan, is excluded. The expansion covers 100% of tariff lines, i.e. all categories of taxable goods, from those African countries. What this means for Africa. 1. Easier access to a huge market. For African exporters, tariff-free access to China, one of the world's largest consumer markets, lowers the cost and barriers to entering that market. This can encourage exports of goods such as agricultural products, minerals, manufactured goods, and more. Because tariffs are removed across all product categories, African countries have flexibility to export a wide variety of goods, not just limited commodities. 2. Potential boost for African economies: trade, industrialization, jobs. Increased exports can generate foreign exchange, improve trade balances, and support economic growth in African countries. More exports and trade may lead to greater employment and industrial activity in Africa. For many African nations, this could mean jobs, higher incomes, and development momentum, especially if trade expands beyond raw commodities into processed/manufactured goods. Some African leaders have explicitly appreciated the opening. For example, a Kenyan official said having access to a 1.4 billion person Chinese market represented a big thing. 3. Opportunity for more diversified exports. Because the tariff waiver isn't limited to a narrow set of goods, African economies have a chance to diversify exports, not just raw materials or agriculture, but potentially manufactured goods, value-added products, etc. This could help reduce economic dependence on a few commodity exports and encourage more sustainable development paths. What this means for China. 1. Strengthening China-Africa economic and geopolitical ties. By offering such a broad tariff waiver, China is signaling deep commitment to Africa, not just as a trade partner, but as a strategic ally. This enhances China's influence across the global south. This move helps consolidate China as the top trade partner for many African countries and reinforces its position as a leading global actor with an alternative trade model to Western protectionism. 2. Access to resources and diversified imports. Africa supplies many raw materials, agricultural products, and other goods that China either needs or finds valuable. Lowering barriers helps China import these more cheaply, which is potentially good for Chinese industries and consumers. The policy may align with China's goal of securing supply chains, especially for commodities, food, natural resources, and other strategic goods, while presenting China as an attractive market partner. 3. Soft power and international leadership messaging. By promoting openness and offering benefits to developing countries, China frames itself as a fair, development-oriented global power, in contrast to more protectionist policies elsewhere. The policy is described by Chinese officials as a public good, supporting global trade liberalization and solidarity with poorer countries. Lightbulb broader global/geopolitical significance. In a period where many major economies are experiencing trade tensions or rising protectionism, China's move stands out as embracing free trade and cooperation. That can shift global trade dynamics and influence the direction of globalization. For African countries, this may deepen their integration into global supply chains, not only with China, but through China's trade networks, potentially giving them more options and less dependence on traditional Western markets. The move could spark competition. Other powers might seek to offer similar trade incentives, or reevaluate their trade relationships with Africa to maintain influence. Warning: complications and who's not included. Despite Africa-wide framing, not all African countries benefit. For example, because of diplomatic relations with Taiwan, Eswatini is excluded. Moreover, due to the regional customs union arrangement, some members like South Africa, and other members of the Southern African Customs Union, SACU, also end up missing out because the union cannot accept benefits for individual members alone. Zero tariffs don't guarantee market success. African exporters still need competitive products, quality standards, logistics, and supply chain capacity. Trade liberalization is only one side of the equation. For China, while imports from Africa may rise, there may be limits on how much African goods can substitute Chinese domestic production, or whether volume/quality from Africa can meet Chinese demand reliably. What it means politically and symbolically. The policy signals that China wants to position itself as a leader of the global south and a partner to developing countries, showing that major economies can support developing nations, rather than exploit them. It may improve Africa's bargaining power. African governments now have a major alternative: a large, welcoming market which might give them more leverage in dealing with global trade conditions, especially compared to historically asymmetric trade with Western powers. Over time, deeper trade and economic interdependence might lead to stronger political and diplomatic alignment between China and many African nations. Massive importation of goods from China into Africa has real benefits: cheap products, access to technology, consumer affordability, but it also brings major disadvantages that directly affect African industries, jobs, and long-term economic security. Here is a clear, structured analysis. Disadvantages of massive importation of Chinese goods into Africa. How it harms local industries, jobs, and long-term economic growth. 1. Destruction of local manufacturing industries. Chinese goods are often cheaper, mass-produced, and heavily subsidized, which makes it nearly impossible for small African factories to compete. This leads to local factories shutting down, local artisans losing markets, domestic production becoming unprofitable. Examples: textile industries in Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa collapsed largely due to cheap imported Chinese textiles. Many African shoe, electronics, and household goods manufacturers have already disappeared. When a continent spends billions importing what it could produce, industrialization dies before it is born. 2. Increase in unemployment, especially youth unemployment. When local factories close, workers lose jobs. Technical and skilled labor opportunities vanish. New graduates can't find industrial jobs. Informal petty trading replaces real employment. This traps millions of young Africans in low-income, unstable livelihoods. 3. Weakening of small and medium enterprises, SMEs. African entrepreneurs trying to build businesses struggle because Chinese products are sold at extremely low prices. Wholesale markets in Africa are dominated by Chinese traders. African SMEs cannot compete with the scale and cheap capital available to Chinese companies. This kills incentive for innovation and discourages entrepreneurship. 4. Dependency syndrome. Africa becomes a consumption economy. The more Africa imports, the less it produces. This leads to economic dependency, weak exports, vulnerability to global shocks, trade deficits, loss of economic sovereignty. Africa becomes a consumer of Chinese products, not a partner with equal industrial strength. 5. Loss of skills, technology transfer, and industrial capacity. Since Africa imports finished goods rather than producing them, local knowledge and skills are not developed. Technical skills are not transferred. Workforce remains low-skilled. Africa loses the opportunity to build factories and acquire advanced capabilities. In other words, imports produce no industrial learning. Local production does. 6. Collapse of agricultural industries. Cheap processed foods, rice, tomatoes, fish, noodles, and poultry imports from China undermine African farmers and food processors. This leads to local farmers losing markets, local food processing industries shutting down, rising rural unemployment, dependence on Chinese food imports. Africa risks food insecurity by abandoning its agricultural power. 7 African markets flooded with low-quality, counterfeit, or disposable goods. A constant complaint across the continent is that many imports are cheap, low quality, short lifespan, hard to repair. This harms consumers, reduces trust in local markets, and gives African industries a bad image even when they produce quality. 8 Drains foreign exchange, forex, reserves. When Africa imports massively, money leaves the continent. Foreign reserves weaken. Currencies lose value. Nigeria, Ghana, Egypt are examples. Inflation rises due to currency depreciation. A country that imports more than it exports becomes financially weaker over time. 9 Chinese companies dominate sectors where Africans could compete. In many African countries, Chinese companies dominate. Construction, textiles, electronics, solar energy, household goods, mining equipment, telecommunications equipment. This leaves African companies with no economic breathing space. 10 Chinese merchants controlling local retail markets. In some African cities, Chinese traders sell goods directly to consumers, instead of only to wholesalers. This means African traders are pushed out. Profits remain in Chinese hands. Local retail markets become foreign-controlled. This creates resentment, tensions, and economic displacement. 11 Undermines long-term national security and economic independence. A country that depends on another nation for everything: clothes, electronics, food, tools, medicine, vehicles, appliances is not sovereign. If China increases prices, restricts exports, enforces political conditions, African economies will collapse. Economic dependence becomes political vulnerability. Why this matters for Africa's future? If African nations continue importing everything instead of building industries, Africa will remain a raw material exporter, a market for foreign goods, a high unemployment region, a dependent continent, a weak global actor. No nation in history became rich through consumption. Only production, industrialization, and value addition create lasting development. A. What Africa should do to protect local industries from Chinese imports. B. Policies that African governments must implement to boost manufacturing. C. How AfCFTA can help Africa become a producer, not a consumer. D. Sector by sector examples of industries China destroyed vs industries Africa can rebuild. A. Protecting local industries from damaging import surges, practical tools and immediate measures. Goal: stabilize domestic firms and give them breathing room to invest, upgrade, and compete. Targeted temporary tariffs and anti-dumping measures. Use narrowly scoped tariffs where imports cause demonstrable injury, textiles, footwear. Anti-dumping and countervailing duties when imports are sold below cost or receive subsidies. Metric: number of cases investigated and % imports covered. Smart quotas/licensing, temporary and transparent. Import licensing for sensitive lines while local capacity is scaled up. Time-bound, reviewed every 6 to 12 months. Guardrails: WTO/FTA compliance, clear criteria, sunset clauses. Quality, safety, and standards enforcement. Strict technical standards and certification for electronics, toys, textiles, foodstuffs. Fast-track testing labs and capacity building at ports to inspect shipments. Result: low-quality, non-compliant goods filtered out protects consumers and local value chains. Local content requirements for public procurement. Preferential procurement for locally produced goods, construction materials, furniture, uniforms. Gradually tighten local content targets with clear exceptions and timelines. Anti-parallel trading and merchant regulation. Enforce commercial registration rules, limit informal bulk importation by foreign traders that flood local markets. Incentivize local wholesaler co-ops to compete. Temporary subsidy/tax relief for vulnerable sectors. Energy discounts, tax holidays, or wage support while firms modernize. Tie subsidies to capital investment, productivity improvements, and job retention. B. Industrial policies to rebuild manufacturing and create jobs, medium and long term. Goal: build competitive local industry that can survive on price and quality. Industrial parks and export processing clusters. Plug-and-play infrastructure, electricity, water, roads, one-stop paperwork, customs facilitation. Co-locate suppliers, training centers, and logistics. KPI, jobs created per hectare, export value from park. Targeted finance and credit guarantees. Low-interest finance, equipment leasing, and credit guarantees for SMEs to upgrade machinery. Matching grants for automation that raises productivity and product quality. Skills and technical training. Apprenticeships, vocational centers linked to industry needs, sewing, plastics molding, electronics assembly. Incentivize firms to run apprenticeships via payroll tax credits. Technology adoption and R&D vouchers. Small R&D grants/vouchers to upgrade product design, packaging, and quality control. Partnerships with universities for product development. Supplier development and value chain linkages. Programs to link raw material producers, example cotton growers, to local processors. Support for packaging, branding, and compliance to export standards. Export promotion and market intelligence. Help firms access new markets, regional, digital platforms, finance for trade fairs, and compliance assistance. Gradual trade liberalization and reciprocity. Open markets where local firms are ready, keep protections until competitiveness achieved. Negotiate reciprocal access, not one-way opening. See how AFCFTA and regional integration can be used strategically. Goal: use AFCFTA to scale production, deepen value chains, and reduce dependence on imports. Leverage a single continental market. Use tariff-free intra-African trade to reach larger demand and achieve scale economies. Action: map which products have regional demand and promote regional champions. Harmonize standards and rules of origin. Simplify rules to enable SMEs to benefit from AFCFTA without onerous paperwork. Invest in mutual recognition of certifications. Regional value chain development. Encourage cross-border clustering, example cotton in one country, rightward arrow spinning in another, rightward arrow garment assembly in a third. Port/road corridor investments to reduce logistics costs. Movement of skills and business services. Facilitate temporary movement of technicians, engineers, and managers to scale capabilities fast. AFCFTA dispute settlement and trade remedies. Use AFCFTA instruments to resolve unfair trade practices and coordinate continent-wide responses to dumping. D sector by sector roadmap, examples plus quick wins, rightward arrow medium, rightward arrow long term. Goal: practical rebuilding plans for sectors most hit by cheap imports. 1. Textiles and apparel. Quick wins: 0 to 12 months anti-dumping cases, public procurement quotas for uniforms, training boot camps. Medium: 1 to 3 years textile clusters linked to local cotton, equipment leasing programs, quality/branding support. Long: 3 to 7 years export fashion brands, meet international compliance, move up the value chain, design, branding. KPIs: local employment in textile mills, % garments locally produced vs imports. 2. Agro-processing, tomato paste, flour, canned fish. Quick wins: improve sanitary controls on imports, subsidies cold storage for farmers. Medium, build canneries/processing lines near production hubs, contract farming. Long, regional branded food exports. KPIs, post-harvest loss reduction, value added per ton. 3. Furniture and wood products. Quick wins, quality standards, preferential procurement for public buildings. Medium, design schools and export promotion. Long, move into higher-end exports, eco-certification. KPIs, local supply share, export orders. 4. Electronics assembly and solar products. Quick wins, small assembly incentives, reclamation and repair centers. Medium, electronics parks, component sourcing strategy. Long, local R&D for adapted products, regional exports. KPIs, number of local assemblies, % local content. 5. Pharmaceuticals and health supplies. Quick wins, tender preference for local generics in public health procurement. Medium, local manufacturing of basic generics, quality upgrades. Long, biosimilars, regional pharma hubs. KPIs, % public procurement sourced locally, quality accreditation achieved. Practical implementation plan, phased plus responsibilities. Phase 0, 0 to 6 months emergency protections, trade investigations, procurement tweaks. Lead, Ministry of Trade plus Customs. Phase 1, 6 to 24 months launch industrial parks, vocational programs, finance facilities. Lead, Ministries of Industry, Finance. Phase 2, 2 to 5 years scale clusters, integrate regionally, lift protections as competitiveness emerges. Lead, Regional Economic Communities plus AFCFTA coordination. Reducing harmful import dependency and reviving African industries. Policy tools for competitiveness, job creation and industrial sovereignty. 1 title slide. Reviving African industries and protecting jobs. Policy strategies to reduce harmful import dependency. Prepared for, Ministry of Trade/Industry/Economic Planning. 2. The problem. Africa faces high unemployment and deindustrialization because local industries cannot compete with cheap, mass-imported goods, especially from Asia. Consequences. Factory closures. Job losses. Declining manufacturing share. Weak foreign reserves. Growing dependence on foreign markets. 3. Strategic objective. To build competitive African manufacturing by protecting vulnerable sectors, enforcing product standards, developing industrial capabilities, leveraging AFCFTA for scale, creating jobs and improving export performance. 4. Pillar A, immediate protective measures. 1. Targeted temporary tariffs and anti-dumping. 2. Import licensing for sensitive goods. 3. Strong quality and safety standards at ports. 4. Local content requirements in public procurement. 5. Regulation of foreign retail dominance. 6. Temporary subsidies for sector modernization. Goal: give African factories breathing room to survive and modernize. 5. Pillar B, industrial development tools. 1. Industrial parks and manufacturing clusters. 2. Low-interest financing and credit guarantees. 3. Technical and vocational training pipelines. 4. SME technology upgrade vouchers. 5. Supplier development programs. 6. Export promotion and market intelligence. Goal: build globally competitive African manufacturing. 6. Pillar C, leveraging AFCFTA. Use AFCFTA to access a 1.3 billion person continental market. Harmonize standards and reduce trade barriers. Build cross-border value chains. Facilitate movement of skilled workers. Use AFCFTA dispute mechanisms to stop unfair trade practices. Goal: shift from import dependence to regional self-sufficiency. 7 Pillar D, sector by sector roadmap. Textiles, anti-dumping rightward arrow cluster development rightward arrow global fashion exports. Agro-processing, import controls rightward arrow processing hubs rightward arrow regional brands. Electronics/solar, assembly incentives rightward arrow component sourcing rightward arrow local R&D. Furniture/wood, procurement priorities rightward arrow design schools rightward arrow eco-certified exports. Pharmaceuticals, tender preference rightward arrow local generics rightward arrow regional pharma hubs. Goal, identify priority sectors where Africa can win fast. 8 Implementation timeline. Phase 1, 0 to 6 months. Trade remedies, standards enforcement, procurement reforms. Phase 2, 6 to 24 months. Industrial parks, credit schemes, skills programs. Phase 3, 2 to 5 years. Regional integration, export scale-up, lifting protections after competitiveness. 9 Key performance indicators, KPIs. Jobs created in industrial sectors. Percent reduction in import dependence. Number of SMEs upgraded. Foreign reserve stability. Manufacturing contribution to GDP. Export value of priority sectors. 10 Conclusion. Africa's economic sovereignty depends on productive capacity, not consumption. With strategic protections, targeted industrial policy, and OFTA-driven scale, African nations can rebuild industries, create millions of jobs, strengthen food and product security, compete globally. A stronger Africa is a producing Africa.